Welcome everyone. It's Rabbi Fried. Hope you're doing all right. Happy Hanukkah. And it's Thursday night, the Parsha of Miketz. So let's cover some of the ideas of Hanukkah. Hopefully we'll get something in the Parsha as well. A lot of stuff going on. But just first of all, quickly on a practical level, shoot this camera a little bit. Okay. On a practical level, how we do Hanukkah, which is important. Most nights it's pretty easy. You light the candles; they should burn for half an hour in the night. But tomorrow afternoon, Friday afternoon, a little bit more complicated because, and I'll give you a little bit of an insight into that. But just a practical level, how is it done? Because obviously Friday afternoon we can't light. Normally we light candles after sundown or after nightfall. They have to burn for half an hour into the night. Friday night, none of that can happen. In fact, let me get the exact times right here. I'm going to open them up on the computer. So when do we light the candles? So it's actually, there's a very small window of opportunity to light Hanukkah candles tomorrow afternoon. Ideally, they're lit before Shabbos candles. Shabbos candle lighting is at 4:17. So before that, you light Hanukkah candles. Now, how much before that? And the answer is we can do it up to, I'm just looking at a time here, a halachic time called Plag HaMincha, which is in New York, it's New York time, 3:42 p.m. So you can't light candles before Hanukkah candles before 3:42. You could light them at 3:42 on Friday afternoon. Certainly before Shabbos candles, which are lit at 4:17, the menorah has to be lit already. So it's very early in the afternoon, not a large window of opportunity. If a person didn't light them at 4:17, you do have until sundown, which is at 4:35. But again, that's really pushing it. We obviously cannot go anywhere near the time of 4:35, which is sundown, lighting Shabbos candles or Hanukkah candles. So whereas, let's say tonight, well, some people lit the candles at sundown, which is 4:34, and some people lit the candles at nightfall, which is 5:05. Okay, but you have the whole night to light candles. If a person comes home they can light their Hanukkah candles now. There's no limit to how late you can light Hanukkah candles. It's got to be done that night, before midnight, before sunrise, dawn. But not Friday night. Friday afternoon, it's a whole different dynamic. And that is the following. As we've said, must be after 3:42, and ideally before 4:17, which is candle lighting. And certainly they cannot be lit anywhere after or near 4:35, which is sundown. So that's very tricky in terms of how things work on Friday afternoon. I often tell people it's one of the most high pressure days of the year. Everyone in the entire Jewish world has to do the mitzvah of Hanukkah candles in that very limited small space window of time. Now it's interesting, just going back to a little bit of the story of Hanukkah, and I want to come back to an insight that Rebbe once said about that interesting halacha of how we do things Friday afternoon. First of all, let's back it up. We're celebrating the miracle that happened with the menorah in the temple, which that needs to be clarified as well, because not everyone even understands that. Okay, well, the Maccabees had a revolt against the Greeks who were trying to harass the Jews. We know that history, the war itself was super miraculous. As a matter of fact, the famous question, why is Hanukkah 8 days long, when in fact they found enough oil for one day. The oil only lasted an extra 7 days. There were 7 days of miracle. Why do we have 8 days of oil? It's a famous question, many answers. The first one historically that we know of to address that question is the Meiri, who's an early commentary. It's called a Rishon, and he writes on the Rambam and as well as other places, and he answers a number of questions about Hanukkah, which we'll touch on them quickly, some of them anyway. And he says that one thing he says is that the first day we're not. Indeed, it's 8 days. The first day is celebrating the fact that we found the oil, or the fact that we won the war. That itself is miraculous and wonderful and unbelievable. He also says, well, they found a he answers. These are all questions that are discussed by many of the commentaries. We know that they found one jar was still with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. Okay, well, and it was pure. How do you know it was pure? One of the ways something can become impure is by, even if it's sealed, by a person who's impure, and of course the Greeks were impure, just moving it. It's called Hesed, the impurity of Hesed, which means moving. So a person can just, a non-Jew or anybody that's impure, can just move that item and make it impure. In this case, move the jar of oil even without breaking the seal, and the oil inside will become impure. And different commentaries say, well, that jar was stored away somewhere in a shelf. It was clear it wasn't moved or budged in any way. And the Meiri Dresser says that you don't need all those kind of forced explanations. You could just say it's obvious that the Greeks, if they would have, it's obvious they didn't see it, because if they would have seen that jar, they would have smashed it, because that's what they were doing, destroying everything. He also says, interestingly, which is what I want to zero in right now, that the war finished on the 24th of Kislev, and then they purified the temple, and that'll happen on the 25th. Not everyone agrees with that. The Rambam says, first of all, classically we know one of the meanings of the word Chanukah is Chanu Chavhei. They rested from the war on the 25th. So they finished the war on the 25th, and the Rambam says it explicitly, as opposed to the Meiri. And what's unusual about that, if you say they finished the war on the 25th, okay, but that means they came back to the temple, cleaned it all up, and were able to look for oil and light the menorah that day. Now let's just understand the mitzvah of the menorah in the temple, because people don't even get that part of the puzzle. We won the war, miraculous, great. Now they're lighting a menorah. Why are they lighting a menorah? Just to clarify, some people might be aware of this, not others are not aware of it, and others are not even aware that others are not aware of it. So that's sometimes trying to make conversation, and you don't realize that the person we're talking to doesn't understand all of these details. But here's the thing. The Greeks defiled and really destroyed the temple, and that's one of the reasons it's called Chanukah. Chanukah means to dedicate. When you build something new, you dedicate it as a new thing. When you built the Mishkan in the desert, which was completed, by the way, on the 25th of Kislev on Chanukah, then you dedicate it. You built the first temple, you dedicate it to Chanukah. Here, they didn't build the second temple. It was in the middle of the second temple era. The second temple was standing for a few hundred years, and it was going to stand for another few hundred years. But the reason they call it Chanukah is dedication, because they had to really clean it up, and it's almost as if they have a new structure to rededicate as if it was a brand new place. Okay, fine. Now, but they want to clean the place up, and all of the mitzvahs that happened on a daily basis in the temple that we're not so aware of because we don't see them now, they started doing again. You know, the Greeks tried to eradicate Jewish life. That included all of the mitzvahs that are done in the temple. What's done in the temple? There are offerings brought every day, and they started doing the offerings again. There's incense brought every day. They did that. And the menorah is lit every day. Now that's where there was a problem, because there was no pure oil. There was no menorah either. They had to set up a menorah. Sorry. So that's why there was a menorah and a need for a miracle of the oil, because they were trying to start up again doing the mitzvahs that the Greeks tried to stop them from doing, and then they were faced with this problem. There's no oil to light the menorah. It's as if it would make more sense to us, let's say, if the war was won on Erev Pesach, the eve of Pesach, and then all of a sudden the Jews look, oh, we need a Seder, we have to find some matzah and more. Yeah, that would make sense, because those are things we can relate to, that we really know we need. Well, one thing, we're not so sensitive that we need it, and the reason we're not sensitive is because temporarily in exile before Mashiach comes we don't have it. It's the mitzvah to light the menorah every day of the year. 7-branch menorah every day of the year, and of course it has to be with olive oil, and they didn't have any olive oil, and they get the olive oil, as the Meiri explains, the other reasons why they need an 8-day miracle. So the Meiri says that, talking a lot about him because I just was learning about him and his approach, that the place to get oil, the best place to get oil, was the land of Tekoa, or the city of Tekoa, and the land of Asher. And that was about 4 days journey away. 4 days to go there, make some oil, quickly come back. And of course, the miracle was Hashem. Now you could say, well, what if the oil wouldn't last that long? It wouldn't be a problem, because you could argue that the menorah had been burning for many months or even years before while the war was going on. Another few days without them, Hashem wouldn't. It wasn't. The miracle wasn't something we need. If we don't have it, it'll be a catastrophe. It's not the same type of miracle. If the miracle of Purim, if it wouldn't have happened, Haman would succeed and the Jews would have been destroyed, God forbid. That's a problem. Here, we don't have oil. If we didn't have oil, so we wouldn't light the menorah. Or we could have lit the menorah with impure oil, which they didn't want to do. Either because of halachic considerations, or it could be that officially, according to halacha and Jewish law, you were allowed to light the menorah with impure oil. But they didn't want to, because they wanted to try and do the mitzvah in the most ideal, perfect way, especially because the whole idea of the purity of the oil represents the purity of the light of Torah and the holiness of Torah, which is what we're fighting against with regard to the Greeks. Because as we know, they weren't necessarily against everything the Jews were doing Jewishly. They were against the spirituality and holiness that's that Judaism represents. To say it's cultural, it's nice, it's ethical, all those cutesy terms, the Greeks were totally for that. And that's exactly what the Maccabees were fighting against. The Torah, Judaism is not something which is comfortable, nice, ethical, a cultural way to live. Torah has nice stories in it with certain lessons, life lessons. No, it's an act of holiness. That was the whole battle between the Greeks and the Jews hinged on that point. So when they won, they wanted the pure oil, and God appreciated that and made sure they were able to have pure oil to burn in the menorah until they got new oil. So if the miracle wouldn't have happened, okay, so we wouldn't have had that mitzvah. But God wanted to show his appreciation for everything we did, and everything the Maccabees did in terms of fighting for Judaism and for Torah, so he made that miracle and they got new oil. Now, incidentally, just to put in another couple of answers to that. Oh, let me say this before I say that, as they say. Now, we light our menorah at night, and I'm going to eventually come back to the idea of Friday night, Friday afternoon. So we're commemorating the miracle of the oil in the temple. Okay. But let's think about that. Everything in the temple was done by day. There was no activity in the temple done at night, virtually. There was some leftover fats and of some of the sacrifices that were done by day. Remember, we're talking about a sacrifice, an offering, an animal offering. The first thing, you slaughter the animal, and the blood has to be sprinkled or placed on the altar. That's the key thing. Then either the entire animal or parts of the animal, some of the innards called emurim, go on the altar. Those latter stages in the act of the sacrifice could be done at night. As long as the animal was slaughtered by day and the blood went on by day, the fats and parts of the animal could be put on the altar at night. So there was that kind of activity done at night, which incidentally is one of the reasons we know we have three services we do during the day, davening prayers, Shachris, Mincha, and Mariv, morning, afternoon, and evening. Each one corresponds to some activity in the temple. In the morning, there was a morning offering brought in the temple called the Tamid. Tamid means constant or consistent. The consistent offering doesn't happen every day. In the afternoon, there was the afternoon Tamid brought in. Now you say, well, on Shabbos there were extra offerings brought in the temple called Musaf. Okay, so we have an extra prayer on Shabbos and Yom Tif and Rosh Chodesh called Musaf. Fine. And then we daven Mariv. Why do we daven Mariv? There was no official offering done at night in the temple. And again, almost nothing was done in the temple. But since there were certain fats and leftovers from sacrifices that could be put on if they weren't done by day, they were put on the fire at night. That's why there's Mariv, and that's why indeed there were some opinions that used to say that to do Mariv, the evening prayer, is more of a reshus, of an optional thing. But of course, Jews, and that's of course referring to the Shemoneh Esrei, the silent prayer of Mariv, not the Shema at night and its blessings. Of course, an obligation. The Shema is a Torah obligation. Anyway, over the years, there's really no difference between the morning, afternoon, and evening prayer, Shachris, Mincha, Mariv, because even Mariv, the evening prayers have been taken on as an obligation by all Jews. Okay. So the menorah in the temple, like everything else, was done by day. So we'll say, well, the menorah was lit in the afternoon and the fire burned into the night. Okay, but it was lit during the day. So the first time they lit the menorah, which was the first day of the miracle, was the night, was in the afternoon at the end of the 25th of Kislev. In fact, they didn't really know at that point they had a miracle until the next day. Possibly. We'll get into that as well. But now that's interesting. According to the opinions, how quickly did they clean up the temple? So the Meiri said, well, the war ended on the 24th. Okay, so then they had that whole day, that afternoon, the 24th, whatever, they went back to the temple, and they started cleaning things up, and they had that whole day. Then finally, the afternoon of the 25th of Kislev, they lit the menorah. But according to the Rambam and others, no, Chanukah Class, the war ended on the 25th. That means that they really had to do a quick turnaround. That means they finished the war, however you define that. And they went back to the temple, cleaned things up a little bit at least, and were able to set up a menorah, look for the oil, all within a few hours. And that very afternoon, the war of the 25th, they lit the menorah for the first time. At any rate, we are lighting our menorah the first night of Hanukkah, the night going into the 25th. So let's say, I don't know what what day of the week Hanukkah was, that we can look it up, because I believe they say it was the year 168 BCE. But let's say, just for argument's sake, it was a Tuesday. The 25th of Kislev that year was a Tuesday. Okay, so the first time they lit the menorah was the afternoon of Tuesday. And we're lighting our menorah every year to come at the beginning of the 25th, which would be Monday evening, the evening before. So that's interesting just to note on that level. A little bit of a difference how we do it. Now, why, you could say, isn't that interesting? We're commemorating the miracle in the temple by doing lighting a menorah. Of course, again, their menorah had 7 candles. Our menorah has 8 candles, with the shamash is 9 candles. But why are we doing it totally differently than they did it? They lit the menorah during the day. That was the mitzvah. And we're remembering that miracle by lighting our menorah specifically at night. So, an answer according to Chassidus, not a real halachic answer, but a more deep, mystical, spiritual answer, is the following. That the idea of Hanukkah, the whole idea of the Maccabees, is to convert and transform darkness, to take the darkness and make it into light. Because what the Greeks represented was a philosophy and a lifestyle which was evil and dark, and they wanted to squash the light of Torah, and we wanted to do quite the opposite. Take the light of Torah and convert the darkness and make it light. Which is why we specifically want to do our mitzvah at night. That's how the rabbis set it up. And that's why it's interesting that ideally, the way the mitzvah, we don't do this so much in America, but in Israel, this is how it was done in olden times, the menorah was actually lit outside of the house, on the door of the house, on the outside, facing the street. Again, showing the idea we want to light up the street, light up the darkness. And in Israel, some people do that even now. Of course, it's a little bit tricky. You light a menorah outside, it's going to blow out. So they have these kind of glass box contraptions, which you can put the menorah in there, and the glass will protect it so the wind won't blow it out, and people can see the menorah in the street. Fine. So that's part of the idea behind what we. There are more points to that, but now I want to back it up to this message of Friday night. Again, we just said that we must be careful, though the mitzvah of menorah is at night, and every day of Hanukkah we're lighting it at night, after nightfall, after sundown at least, different customs, it burns into the night. So what do we say you have to do on Friday? We just said it. Light before sundown, well before sundown. Candle lighting, which is 4:17 in New York, 18 minutes before sundown. And even earlier you can light it at 3:42, which is the earliest time to light, which is called Flag HaMincha. Without getting into all the details about what that means, but that's the earliest time to light. Check that again. 3:42. Fine. So, the Rebbe asked the following question, which is I find fascinating, and I'm going to share it. What's going on here? Friday afternoon, we twist ourselves into a pretzel, as I've explained that you have to light early. Why? The mitzvah to light the Chanukah candles is at night and all week long of Chanukah. Even today, somebody said, hey, I know that in an emergency situation, you can light as early as Plag, which is 3:42. Can I light then? I said, no. The mitzvah is to light after sundown. Assuming you have olive oil or long candles that can burn until half an hour after nightfall, which is like 5:35. But you wait till sundown. So the candles, you light them at nightfall or sundown, fine. Now if you say, well, here's the problem. Friday after evening, you can't light candles because it's Shabbos. Okay. Well, I've got a simple piece of advice. Skip the mitzvah. We find a number of cases in halacha, in Jewish law, where because of various concerns, a mitzvah is suspended. So, for example, shofar, I believe it's coming up this year, where if Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, the Torah says the most important mitzvah, you wait start the year, you blow shofar. Let me check when Rosh Hashanah is. No, my mistake. Monday evening, Tuesday, Wednesday. Sorry about that. But it's very common that Rosh Hashanah should fall on Shabbos. And what do we say? The rabbis say, you know what? If it's on Shabbos, we don't want you to blow shofar. Now, how can the rabbis nullify and suspend a Torah obligation? That's a different discussion. That's a very valid question. Very lengthy discussion. We're not going to get into it now. And they were worried, apparently, for the most flimsy of reasons, you could argue. They were worried that if a person has a shofar, doesn't know how to blow, he might want to go to a rabbi and teach him how to blow. He's going to end up carrying the shofar in the public domain. For all that, that's an extreme concern. How many places have a real public domain? How many people have a shofar but don't know how to blow it? People don't know how to blow it, but it doesn't matter. The bottom line is, because of certain limited concerns, the rabbi said no problem suspending the entire mitzvah of shofar when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos. Same thing goes for lulav, by the way. That even the first day of Sukkot, which is the most important day to shake lulav, if it's Shabbos on the first day of Sukkot, the rabbi said don't shake lulav. And again, then it's even more of a question. You're going to take it. What are you going to do? Take the lulav and carry it in the street? Why? Because ask the rabbi how to do the mitzvah. That's the mitzvah. By picking up the lulav to carry it, you've already fulfilled the mitzvah. A shofar, you could say, I want to know. I'm bringing you the shofar. Show me how to blow. What do I do with it? But anyway, the point is that if there are certain concerns, the rabbis can suspend even a Torah obligation. Here, the whole holiday is rabbinic. It's not from the Torah. The rabbis enacted this holiday of Chanukah. Obviously, it's very important. It's holy. It's the most holy holiday. But it comes from the rabbis. And why did they just say very simple? If we want you to light the candles Friday at night. Friday night you can't light candles, so skip lighting them. Don't light the menorah on Shabbos. Very simple, and it's a much deeper question. The obligation is not as great. It's not a Torah obligation. It's a rabbinic obligation, and it's not because we're concerned that doing this mitzvah might lead to some prohibition. The mitzvah is a prohibition. The mitzvah is to light candles and use fire, which you can't do on Shabbos. Yet we find the mitzvah is not suspended. Rather, what happens? The rabbis say, you know what? Just do it earlier in the afternoon. We'll put extra oil, and I should have said this. We have to make sure that no matter how early we light the candles, they must burn till a half an hour after nightfall, which will be nightfall 5:05. Let's say they have to burn till 5:35. So which means some candles that we use during the week, which are pretty skinny, only last a half an hour. We shouldn't use those on Friday afternoon, because if we light them even at 4:17. Certainly, if we light them at 3:42, they're not going to last until 5:35. But that's the mitzvah. Light them earlier, and they'll make sure they burn with enough oil into the night. So, in other words, we have a zone which is prohibited, which is the evening of Shabbos, of Friday evening. So what do? Let's access what we can access. That time before sundown, the time before candle lighting. Light our candles then, but put extra oil and make sure they burn extra late and into the night, into that area of the night which we officially cannot access in terms of lighting our own menorah. What's the lesson here? The halachic side the Rebbe didn't address, at least in this talk I read many years ago. But he said there's a very good lesson here. And it's based on this idea that we say, well, lighting the menorah is to light up the darkness, to take the light and beauty and warmth of Torah and bring it into the darkness, into the night, into unholy places, into the public domain, which means, which we said that's where you light the menorah ideally, in the public domain. And that means the public domain, Kabbalistically means the domain, the private domain is that area which is totally connected with, which in Hebrew it's not called private domain, the words are Rishus HaYachid, the domain of the one, which of course the one refers to God. The public domain, Rishus Ra, means it's a plurality, it's a place where God isn't felt, which is the street. And it seems like there's a plurality, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of opinions, there are a lot of different people that seem to be in charge, and none of them seem to have any recognition of God. So plurality is always negative, certainly in Kabbalistic and mystical terms. But that's where we light the light of the Chanukah candles. Fine. But let's say you have an area of darkness which you can't access. The Rebbe is suggesting this idea. You can't go there, quite literally. Besides Friday night, that's it. But the Rebbe gave the example. Let's say that, God forbid, this was much more, I think it was more common in the 70s and the 80s. It's not unheard of now either. But he gave the example. Let's say a Jew gets swallowed up in a cult in India. So they're in one of these idolatrous cults, which would take over a Jew's mind and disconnect him from his family. And it's quite literally, that Jew is in a place you can't go there. You can't go to India. You can't go to these camps where they have these cults. There's no way to go and access that Jew. So the Rebbe said that's the example of Friday night. There's a place of darkness we can't reach. So what's the eitzah? What's the advice? What do we do? So he said that's the lesson of Friday afternoon's candle lighting. We go to these area, the zone, the time frame, which is permitted to us, which is that time before sundown. We add extra light there so that light overflows and goes into the nighttime of Friday night, the area and time that we can't directly access. So what does that mean on a practical level? We have to bring the light of Torah to the people and areas that also need our help that we could access. The places that are closer to home, they're not India, and bring the light of Torah there. But put so much light and energy and effort into those areas or those people or those scenarios which need an upgrade spiritually, but with extra energy and extra light. And the idea and the hope is that that light will overflow and even reach the areas we can't access. So just like the extra oil on Friday afternoon overflows and goes into the light of Friday night, which we can't directly access because we can't light candles Friday night, but our candles on Friday afternoon have an effect on Friday night, so too if we have to try to do outreach and bring the warmth of Judaism to people that we can access and we can come close to in our surroundings and in our circle of our sphere of influence, that warmth and light can overflow and at least in a non-direct way even affect people that we can't reach directly or access directly because they're beyond our reach. In this example the Rebbe gave, they're in a cult in India, but there are many examples you can think of people that are not reachable because they make themselves unreachable, even if they're not physically in a cult in India, but if their mind is closed to hearing or even discussing Judaism. I often wonder, if people on a mitzvah tank and they stop people in the street, "You Jewish yet? You want to put on tefillin?" "Oh, I'll put on tefillin." What about the person that says, "No, I don't want to"? And sometimes it's because maybe they're in a hurry, or they don't understand the value of tefillin, or they have an opinion. I don't believe in tefillin. There are all kinds of ideas, but how do you access that? Well, let's put as much effort in as we can into the people we could access, telling them about the beauty of the mitzvah of Tefillin or any other mitzvah, and hopefully it'll overflow. So that's a lesson the Rebbe made from the idea that we purposely light tefillin on Friday. I light the menorah, light the menorah on Friday afternoon, even though it's you could have argued that since the mitzvah is to be done at night, we don't have to do the mitzvah of menorah at all on Friday night. I want to share another Chanukah idea. There's a lot in along the lines of this question: why is Chanukah 8 days? So, and it's interesting talking about the oil, the light represented the light of Torah. There is a lot of Torah to discuss in terms of Hanukkah, maybe more so than any other holiday, because we get into so many different areas. We're just talking about the laws of Hesed, the laws which are obscure laws of impurity, but it comes into play in discussion here. So the question is, there was enough oil to last one day, so and it lasted an extra 7 days. The miracle was only 7 days, not 8 days. So one of the commentaries, is known as the Taz, has the following answer, which is, and there'll be an answer, then there'll be a question on that answer, and I have another response. But let's try to cover at least this piece quickly. Taz says, based on the Kabbalah, that in order for Hashem to make a miracle, there has to be something there. What does that mean? Well, we have the famous story in the Bible with the poor woman and her 2 children. And she was found by Elisha. The famous prophet Elisha was a student of Elijah the prophet, and he was the leader of the Jewish people after Eliyahu. And it's a famous story, she was crying and she was totally destitute, and she owed all kinds of money, and the debtors were going to come and take her children away to debtors' prison, or just sell them as slaves, not debtors, the debtors' prison, another thing, because she couldn't pay So she's crying to Elisha about this whole scenario. So he says, well, what do you have in your house? She says, nothing. He said, nothing, really, nothing. She says, I have a drop of oil. So that's good. He says, now, go borrow from all of your neighbors every kind of vessel, utensil, receptacle you could possibly borrow. Pots, pans, buckets, bathtubs, you name it. Borrow everything. She borrowed tons of this stuff. And then he made a miracle, and that little bit of oil reproduced into all this oil that filled all of these utensils. And as soon as there were no more utensils left, he said, get another utensil, the oil keeps flowing, nothing left. Everything that she borrowed got filled up. And then the oil stopped reproducing, then she had tons of oil, swimming in oil, so able to sell it, pay off all the debts. But the way the Zohar points out, the way the story started is, she had to have a little bit of oil in the house, which has a lot of mystical connotations as well on other levels, which we're not going to get into now. But the Taz, one of the commentators in Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, says that's the point. In order to have a miracle, you have to start with something. You have to start with, just see how, okay? Yeah, it has to be based on something. So, in other words, let's think about this. They lit the menorah on the first day. And then the second day, the menorah was still burning. Well, how is it still burning? It must be that a drop of the oil from the first day didn't burn off, and that was the bit that could reproduce and fill the menorah again on the second day. In other words, if all the oil burned off on the first day, it was a full day's worth of oil, actually 14 hours, it only has to burn from the evening till the morning, about 14 hours, let's say. So then there would be nothing for the bracha, the blessing, to materialize upon in the second day. In order to have oil for the second day, it can't be that all the oil the first day burned off. That's the Taz's answer. So there was a miracle even on the first day. And this is based on the idea that when they, that's what he says, the Taz, that in the morning, if you want to say when they came back in the morning, all the cups were full, or there was at least some oil left. Something had to be left from the first day in order to materialize on the second day. The question on that is, where is that written? God needs a little drop of something to make him real. He can't create something ex nihilo, something out of nothing. Why not? The whole creation is ex nihilo. Well, Elisha needed a drop of oil to do that miracle. Yeah, but Elisha is just a prophet. Maybe for a prophet to do a miracle, it's got to materialize on something that has to be a drop of oil. But God can do whatever he wants. So, what do you mean some oil had to remain from the first day? That's the question they have in the Taz. But a response to that is interesting. And these go on and on. I'll just stop here because there's really no end to this. But the response is, this I think they quote from the Gera Rebbe, the Chidush Harim. He says, yeah, here's the thing. We're doing a mitzvah here, the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. A mitzvah has to be done in a natural means. The Talmud asked the question, if you had some wheat that came miraculously out of heaven, could you use that wheat in the temple? Remember, in the temple, there were many offerings on a daily basis that were done with wheat. Not just the animal sacrifice, you had bird sacrifices, you had wine, libations, and you had flour offerings. Can you use, that's a question, can you use miracle wheat? And the Talmud says, no, it's a question. So if you'd have if all the oil of the first day burned off, and for the second day it was total miracle oil that was created totally ex nihilo by God, so the Rebbe says, of course God could do that, but it would be miracle oil. It wouldn't be natural oil that you can use for a mitzvah. So the Rebbe says that's what the Taz means. Of course, God can make any miracle he wants, but if you can have natural oil to do the mitzvah with, then some of the natural oil has to be left over for the first day, and God can reproduce that on the second day. And there's more to that discussion as well, because you could argue, well, if you're reproducing the oil, isn't that itself miracle oil, which is not for the mitzvah? And then there are many discussions and layers about this question, and it really goes on and on to really understand on the deepest level what exactly the miracle of the 8 days was about. And we'll just leave it there and continue because we're out of time, but I just want to share some of those ideas of Chanukah and show you how deep, both on an insightful level and in terms of the messages we get, in terms of the halacha we can discuss on Chanukah, it really goes on and on. And I'm going to wish everyone a great Chanukah, and we should hope and pray to God that from lighting the menorah as we do every day on Chanukah, we'll merit to see the candles of the 7-branch menorah in the temple burning with the coming of Mashiach. Have a great Shabbos and happy Chanukah.